NFTs are in a very weird place right now. NFTs, for those that don't know, are non-fungible tokens. The NFTs were very, very popular through kind of the first quarter of this year. It seemed like every day, every mainstream story was all about NFTs. There was a very big NFT sale for $69 million. A gentleman named Beeple, who is just the man. He's literally just the man, who sold it at an auction at Christie's. There's been multiple other very large sales since then. But now we're starting to see NFT sales of certain types come down. And then we're also seeing some NFT platforms really, really find great success. So Joe, what stats do you have around kind of the NFT stuff that is worth calling out?
I don't know if I have much stats. I mean, I could look up the market cap of kind of what was going on NBA Top Shot, because I think that was one of the more popular ones kind of in.
So look at NBA Top Shot. The two that I think are really fascinating, one I invested in, one I didn't. One is called Foundation. It's a decentralized NFT platform that I think is really interesting because it's kind of, you come in, you're self-serve, you can create it. No one really can kind of stop you from doing that. You don't have to necessarily apply and do all the things that you have to do on some of the other platforms. The second one that I'm not an investor in is called Sorare, Sorare. And what they do is they basically have a game, kind of like fantasy football, but it's for soccer or European football. And you, instead of drafting players, you basically have to buy the actual asset, like the player token or card. And then if you own it, you can play it in the game. If you don't own it, then you have to exchange it with somebody else to get that player. So it almost creates this kind of value around the player rather than kind of the American version of fantasy football. My guess is somebody's going to build it for fantasy football. If anyone out there is going to build the Sorare for fantasy football, please come to us. We absolutely would be interested in looking at it from an investment standpoint. But I think that's where this stuff becomes really interesting, is when there's like true utility and people can kind of play with it and use it in a way that drives engagement on all these platforms.
Yeah, so I have some general numbers around NBA Top Shot. Since the high in Q1, monthly sales volume has fallen 76% to $53 million. And then traders on the platform, NBA Top Shot, has fallen about 40% to 246 total people on the platform. So I think there's obviously been a drop off in user base, but I think to some degree that was probably inevitable, right? Because when you see something rise that quickly and people are trying to figure out what it's worth, there's a craze behind it, there's people in it for the wrong reasons, etc., you're going to see some kind of natural leveling off. The thing that interests me the most, kind of outside of NBA Top Shot, because NBA Top Shot to me is still kind of sort of a collectible, right? It's not physical, but it's digital, and you can collect it and you trade them, and a lot of people on there are probably trying to make money or flip them or do whatever. But the NFTs that I think have done really, really well are the ones that have some sort of utility and give you special access, right? And you can kind of participate with the player or the organization that's issuing them. So two of them really stick out to me. One was LaMelo Ball, who's an NBA player. He plays for the Hornets. And he was an early pick. He was Rookie of the Year this year, but he issued 500 NFTs. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but essentially what he did was he tied them to his career. So he said, there's 500. That's all I'm ever going to offer. And then they're going to be tied to my accomplishments. So basically, if I win the Rookie of the Year award, it's going to be tied to that NFT and the value should increase. If I get hurt, it's going to be tied to the NFT. The value will decrease over time. And there's some kind of interesting things I think he's going to do with memorabilia around it. But the idea that you're going to bet on someone's career and basically invest stock in their NFT is interesting to me, right?
I think when you start getting into this world of players or teams or companies, let's just break down what it is. It's just intellectual property.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, that's all this is, intellectual property. And so whether it's the LaMelo Balls of the world or somebody else, you could easily see what's the difference between Disney selling a Beanie Baby, right, with their brand on it, and kind of they've licensed their brand to Beanie Baby and they create a whole thing. Disney selling toys for a certain franchise or whatever, or Disney selling a poster, a t-shirt, or whatever. Now they're just selling a digital version of it.
Yeah.
And I get that there's controversy around this. I get people are upset about it or whatever. Now, some of that is because it's new. Some of that's because there's definitely people who are just doing pure cash grabs and somewhat nefarious stuff that I think we don't agree with. But in terms of the intellectual property is as old as time. And if you like it or you don't, a company like Disney's going to do this, right? They're going to figure out a strategy here because they own the IP. And when they own the IP, they end up actually creating unique experiences. So you could see something where they say, hey, we've created, I don't know, Marvel themed amusement park. And in order to get into the Marvel themed amusement park, you have to own a digital ticket. The digital ticket is a non-fungible token. That NFT then is the thing you can take home. You can put it on a screen. You can do things with it. You can trade them. You can do all these different stuff. Now, I'm not saying whether I think that they should do that or not do that. I'm just saying they're going to do it, right? That they're going to do it because when you own the intellectual property, that's the entire business model, is to take the intellectual property and to license it into all these different formats. And the second that you have a format that is digital so that the kind of production costs go nearly to zero, all of a sudden the margin explodes compared to creating physical products like toys or other things. And it's just from an economic incentive standpoint, all these businesses are going to rush to it. And I think that's what we saw with NBA Top Shot was they said, wait a second, the only pricing that we have for our intellectual property, the NBA's intellectual property is what happens in the game, right? They have their brand and they have what's in the game and kind of the content. Historically, they've taken that content and they've sold it to the highest bidder for network televisions. The only competition that the network televisions have had recently is the Amazons or the Googles coming in with YouTube and saying, hey, maybe we want to look at see what this would cost us to actually purchase. Now, that is what, maybe 15 bidders, and 12 of them are cable networks. So maybe it's actually not even 12, maybe it's like 5 or 6. And then there are a couple of these tech companies, but that's pretty much it. What they instead said was, rather than us having to take all of the league kind of content rights and auction them off to one single bidder, what if we actually broke them up? We fractionalized the intellectual property and then we auctioned it off to a free market. And what they realized was, whoa, we can make way more money. Again, I'm not saying whether they should do it or not do it, if it's a good purchase or a bad purchase. I'm just saying that the economic incentive is such a no-brainer for them to go do that, of course, they're going to go enter the market. And so do we know how much money the NBA made off of Top Shot?
It was on pace for $200 million at its high. I don't know how
and
much
their TV
so
deal is what, $2 billion a year?
Yeah, 2.5 right now.
All right, so let's say that we're going to use ballpark numbers.
Mark Cuban says that he thinks it could be a top 2, 3, or 4 revenue source for the NBA within the next decade.
Well, so if the TV rights to the NBA are $2.5 billion and the Top Shot partnership was driving them, let's just say $250 million, right, each year. It's already 10% of the TV rights and it's less than a year old, right? And so you'd have to ask, does that go higher? Does it go lower? Is that the actual number? Time would tell. But to me, that's fascinating that they're able to do that quickly. And it shows why Major League Baseball and everyone else kind of followed in line almost immediately, is because they saw an economic reason. The incentive was there. Now, the bear case to it, right, is a lot of the value of those things fell drastically. And so the critic would say, there's no way the NBA will ever make $250 million a year doing this again. I think the short answer is nobody knows what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah,
right?
But I think I want to say they get 2.5% of all transactions. So it's a no-brainer for them to, like you said, monetize their intellectual property that they're already creating, right? It's just a new revenue stream and a new market for them to do. And if it has the potential to become a top 3 revenue source for them, that's incredible, right? But I think, to your point, that's really why the prices have fallen, is because there's never been a market for this intellectual property to operate in, right? And there's some price discovery that goes on, and the kind of digital marketplace nature of it has increased that and accelerated it to some degree. But I think that's why the prices have fallen a lot, because when it came out of the gate, no one knows how to price these things. What are they worth, right? I think there's some leveling off and figuring out what it's worth, and then over time we'll see it probably pick up a little more depending on the asset and kind of the utility of it.
The controversy around this stuff, right, especially in the Bitcoin community, I think actually twofold. One was the way it was marketed was trying to ride the coattails of decentralization and all these things that it doesn't matter, right? Yeah. Why does NBA Top Shot need to be decentralized? Right. And not just them, but just that, if I own a highlight to an NBA game that I think that I'm buying specifically because I think I can sell it in the future for a higher price, I don't need decentralization. So kind of that value proposition of Bitcoin centric world doesn't really make sense here. Right. The second thing is that there was this belief that you basically were going to buy it and then sell it for a future value, right? So like, is it truly valuable or is it simply a speculative mania? Right now, prices coming down would suggest that there was some level of speculative mania. Maybe there's a leveling off. We'll see what happens. But I think that this is a key point across a lot of these technologies, right? There's Bitcoin and the decentralization. And Bitcoin basically said our trade-off is we're going to give up being the winner right now in the short term on all these other things, and we're going to make sure we're the most decentralized. We think decentralization equals security. Security is the most important thing, and that's what we're going to go be the best in the world at. There's lots of people who saw that and said, oh, I want to go do A, B, C, D other thing. And some of the stuff has value, some of it doesn't. But to me, what they're saying is we're going to make the trade-off between decentralization and this other thing, the innovative technology, higher throughput, lower fees, whatever. They should just double and triple down on that, right? Like just be like, hey, we have a new technology. That new technology allows us to basically take highlights in an NBA game. We're going to auction them off. If you want to own them, great. There's a marketplace. You can trade them around. And that's what it is. But rather, I don't think that leagues or teams or anybody has to be like, oh, it's decentralized, right? Like to me, that's I think where the Bitcoin community gets really upset about it. It's just like, this stuff might not be as decentralized as everyone is claiming it to be.
Yeah, one of the things I think is interesting is we're seeing Christie's and Sotheby's like get involved in these auctions, which is wild because it just shows that no matter where brands are or companies are, like they have to form with the digital age. They sell diamonds, dude. We sell NFTs.
I mean, the question is always, what is art? Art is what you can get away with. Right? Like that's what the artist
money
would say.
talks.
Huh? Yeah. Well, of course. If I said to you, hey, you can sell a computer file, someone's going to pay $69 million for it. Guess what Christie's and Sotheby's says? How soon can you get it to us?
Do we know how long? I know Beeple's main piece was a collection of years of work and stuff like that. But do we know how long like an average one of these art pieces takes to create?
I've talked to a lot of the artists.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different ways that they create it. One is they can actually paint or draw in a physical thing, so like on a canvas or whatever. Yeah. And they can basically take that piece, digitize it to some degree, and then create the NFT. Those take the longest because you're physically painting or whatever. There's actually probably the most popular way to make them that I've seen is people use like an iPad, and you can essentially like draw, and then you can kind of like pick that area, okay, make it red, right? And like it kind of accelerates the process. There is still some very significant art, right? If you can't draw or whatever, then obviously you're going to suck.
Yeah, I see people post pictures of him on like this computer program that looks.
So that's like the most advanced way to do it, which is he's basically using, and I don't want to speak for him and kind of the exact thing. So hopefully I don't offend him here, but he's basically using what I would consider the same kind of like graphics software that would be used to make like animation in a movie, right? Like all sorts of green screen type things that you could do. And that's why you get in the top left here, you can see Beeple's piece. Like that's not a hand-drawn thing, right? Yeah. That is definitely computer graphics that he's using to create it. And there's motion and sound and some animation to it. And so I really think it's just different people make different things depending on what their artistic capabilities are.
Well, you can take something that's already created and just make it an NFT, right? So the video, there's a viral video of like two kids basically playing. One of the brothers bit the other brother's finger. Don't come near my fingers, all that.
Charlie bit my finger.
Yeah, Charlie bit my finger. It sold for $160,000 as an NFT.
It's crazy. One of the areas that I do think will be very interesting to watch is fractionalizing the ownership of true intellectual property. So art is subjective, right? You may think a piece of art's really great. I may think that it sucks, vice versa. But let's take like a patent, for example. So if I said to you right now, hey, I know the guy who owns the patent on the light bulb, right? And we could buy 2% of that patent for X dollars. I think everyone would say, well, how much?
Yeah.
Right? If it's $5 and I can get 2% of the patent and I get a royalty off every light bulb sold in the world, yeah, that might be pretty interesting, right? And so it's similar to a sports team. Like usually people, if they have some level of wealth, are trying to buy a portion, a small minority position of the sports team. Same thing now is, well, what if you can do that with intellectual property? The fractionalization to me is the most fascinating part. Again, you don't need decentralization. What the technology underlying, it doesn't really matter to me, right? It's just the idea that now when you fractionalize ownership of intellectual property and you can expose it to a free market, you're going to get true price discovery. And then when you have that fractional ownership, what ends up occurring is you drastically increase accessibility. And so it opens up an entirely new asset class that previously wasn't available.